Dr. Muhammad Golam Samdani Fakir, Vice Chancellor, Green University of Bangladesh, to deliver his opening speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanjia. Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Abdur, our Honorable Keynote Speaker, Dr. Mark, our special guest, Professor Cherry Brown, Shiraji Munina, Director of the Centers, our faculty members, and our beloved students. Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum and namaskar. I do believe this is a wonderful occasion, and the topic that has been selected is also wonderful. And I was looking into this title, What Not to Do. Usually you always focus on what we should do. So for improving our reading skill, what not to do, this is a very interesting way that articulating it. I would say that from the perspective of Bangladeshi students, I do believe that the presentation will be focusing more for the students. Reading skill is considered a gateway for further development of our students and all professionals. Now the question comes that how can we really analyze the reading skills so that we can ensure quality reading skills. There are several ways that we can look into this, and I'm sure that our distinguished keynote speakers and our special guests, those who have got a seasoned learning over there, they will highlight it more on this aspect. But I do believe that our students and follow us, those who have not really done quality reading skills, we remain far behind. And this, because of this poor quality reading skills, sometimes we cannot really enter into the higher education. We cannot really enjoy the readings. So obviously the question comes, why do we need to read quality reading skills? We need this definitely for better comprehension. We also need reading skills to really learn. And at the same time, we need to also, for the student purpose, that going through different kind of readings, how they can really comprehend and develop better ideas in terms of comprehension. That is definitely very much needed. But if you look into this, one of the research study conducted by American Federation of Teachers, they have found that all the teachers, they do believe, those who are teaching English language, the 70%, the teachers believe that quality reading skills is very essential for all the students. It doesn't matter which subject they are reading. And at the same time, they also did another survey with their parents of the students. And they found almost 62% of the parents that do believe that their students need better quality skills in order to really comprehend and better success in the field. So I do believe this is a very important area, and we are looking forward to listen from both of our keynote speakers and our special guest. This is not my cup of tea. I'm also willing to learn from all of you. So thank you very much for joining with us. I really appreciate our Center for Excellence, particularly the Language Center, for organizing this event. It is very much needed for our students. And I'm sure through this process, our faculty members, those who are present today, they will also get better insight in quality reading skills. Thank you very much. With this, I'm going to request Tanjina to invite our keynote speaker for making presentations.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a lively and informative speech. It is always a pleasure listening to you. Now it is time to listen to our main speaker of the event, Dr. Mark Bartholomew. Mark is a prominent educationist who made outstanding contributions to the areas of education and professional development. He has degrees and qualifications from various reputed universities in UK. He completed his PhD at the University of Oxford. He has a shining international career with British Council, University of Cambridge Assessments, and he has performed consultant roles with the Open University of India. That is, He has worked as the Director of South Asia Region at University of Cambridge International Education, as the Director of British Council in Chittagong, and as Deputy Director of British Council Bangladesh. Mark has spent many years living and working in Bangladesh, where he has been involved in teachers training and has championed translating Bangladeshi writing into English. He says he will never retire and he hopes to stay in this country into his anecdote age. So it is a great honor and privilege for us to have such a prolific person as our speaker today. The audience, you can leave your questions in our Zoom chat box for the question answer session. Because there are time constraints and there might be connectivity issues, we will have a short question answer session with your questions in the chat box. Now, I would like to request our main speaker of the webinar, Dr. Mark Bartholomew, to please deliver his talk for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the warm welcome from Professor Samdani to the Pro Vice Chancellor, to Professor Brown all the way from Japan, and to all the faculty and students of Green University who are here today. Can I say, if my electricity goes off, I have a generator, and within 3 minutes, I will be back with you, okay? So don't run away, unless, of course, I have really, really bored you up until that point, and then you can pretend you have an electricity problem and you can escape. I'm going to talk today about reading, and I reckon that most of you, if you are students of English literature, of English language, actually find reading the most boring of the language skills. And I'm going to suggest to you, number one, that is not, and number two, that the reason you find it boring is because of people like me. Yes, that we have taught reading to you in ways which are bound to bore you and are bound to turn you off reading. And I want to start by talking about my past, because you've heard from Tanzia about my educational qualifications. But in fact, my father grew up in a prison camp in Poland during the Second World War. And to the end of his life, he had no idea what an apostrophe was. He would write, I don't know, I-D-O-N-T-N-O. Yes, English was his third language, and he couldn't actually read and write in any language that he knew. My mother left school when she was 14. She was English, and she left school when she was 14. And I grew up in a house where we had bookshelves, but on those bookshelves we had photographs, vases of plastic flowers, etc., etc. What we didn't have was books, because nobody in my family read. But my father was a successful businessman, and as is the way with so many parents, he wanted me to be a better and bigger man than he was. And he sent me to a private school, a good school in England. And there I was lucky enough to get an English teacher called Mr. Chambers. And Mr. Chambers, one day, he said to me, "What are you reading, Bartholomew?" And I said, "Great Expectations by Charles Dickens." And he said, "Yes," he said, "that's what we're reading in class." He said, "What are you reading for pleasure?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. Reading for me was about exams, was about getting an A grade, but reading to enjoy myself, I'd never heard of it. And he looked at me and he said, "Ooh," he said, "ooh, big mistake, big mistake." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because at times in your life, you will have no friends." He said, "You will be unpopular at work." He said, "Maybe you will get a divorce. And all of your friends will no longer be your friends because they will be your wife's friends, or they will disagree with the way you run your office, that people will dislike you." And he said, "But," he said, "if you make friends with books now," he said, "books will always be your friends. They will always be there for you." And he said, "And they will tell you that you're never, ever alone in life. That even if you're reading someone from another continent, separated from you by thousands of miles, if you're reading someone separated from you by 100 years, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, that person is communicating with you across historical time, across geographical space, and that you are not alone, because what you feel in the most secret parts of your heart, someone has felt exactly those things at a different time, in a different place." I started reading, and Mr. Chambers has been dead now, I imagine, for many, many, not I imagine, I know he's been dead for many years. But that guy changed my life because he opened up a world for me. He opened up the world of literature. And it breaks my heart that when I look at Bangladesh these days, and not just Bangladesh, by the way, UK, yeah, I can see that the way that we teach reading, this escape to another reality away from our boring, humdrum COVID lives, that we are not opening up an adventure for students, yeah? We are teaching them reading in the most boring ways possible. And now I would like to tell you why. But I am also going to open up my screen, okay? And I am going to share. Can you see that? What not? Yes, everyone's got that, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. And if you email me, I will send you this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, I will give you my email address later on. What I want to do is, I want to say that when we as teachers are teaching reading, usually we're not teaching reading. Usually what we're doing is we are teaching grammar, or we're teaching really, really difficult and unusual vocabulary. Yeah, and if you look at the slide there, you can see that teachers usually choose difficult passages. And they, in their lessons, rather than actually talking about story, about non-fiction, what they do is they talk about grammar, and they say underline the present. Yeah, find examples in paragraph 2 of the passive voice. Yeah, you see, that's not a reading lesson. That's a thing, isn't it, with vocabulary? You know, in line 12, what does them refer to? What does cacophony mean? Yeah, all of these really, really difficult things. So what we're actually doing is we're testing you. When we're teaching reading, we actually are not talking about reading, we're testing all the time. And we're testing things which are difficult. And then I'd say something else. I'd say we also choose books, we choose passages which have no relationship at all to our students' lives. Okay? Has recently been working with the Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association to publish online stories in English, not just stories, but also poetry, by Bangladeshis for Bangladeshis. Yeah, I have been involved with Bengal Lights books from the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, again to look at what Bangladeshis are saying about Bangladesh. If you think about that, it's important. Because if you look at the BBC, if you look at CNN, if you look at Al Jazeera, very often the people who are talking about Bangladesh are British, they're Americans, they're Indians, but quite unusually, they're Bangladeshis. Yeah, the Bangladeshis don't have a vehicle, they don't have a voice to speak about their own experience. And in universities, what we do is we teach the Romantic poets, for example, or Shakespeare, or Dickens. Now, don't get me wrong, Dickens is my favorite novelist in the world. He's my favorite, 100% favorite of all time, of all nationalities. But I am a 60-year-old. Look at me, yeah? Look at, as you can imagine, my face has seen better days, yeah? And I can tell you now, when I was 20, I did not like Dickens, yeah? My appreciation of Dickens has come with time. And therefore, what I like need not be the same as what you like, okay? And just to prove it to you, and here I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say to you is true, okay? I don't like Wordsworth. I have only ever managed to finish one D.H. Lawrence novel. Yeah, I've tried several. I can never get to the end. Yeah, I do not like, yeah, restoration comedy. Yeah, it is okay for us to have our own preferences. We don't, here's another one. I do not like Shakespeare's As You Like It, The Tempest, Much Ado About Nothing, Midsummer Night's Dream, yeah. I do like Macbeth, Julius Caesar, Richard III, but I don't much like Shakespeare's comedies. It's okay for us to say we have our own personal preferences. Excuse me, sorry. But the trouble is that when we go into class and we're teaching Wordsworth and Shakespeare's comedies and The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence and blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, students are expected to like it. So, I was talking to a school in Sylhet, and these class 9 boys, and I said, who is your favorite writer? And they said, Shakespeare! They're lying. Yes, their favorite writer is certainly not Shakespeare. Yeah? He is difficult for me with my Oxford PhD to understand when I'm 60 years old in my native language. He must be impossible for a 15-year-old Sylheti boy to understand. And Shakespeare was not writing for 15-year-old Sylheti boys, yeah? But teachers, of course, Shakespeare is the greatest, the greatest, the greatest. And therefore, you know, we must memorize Shakespeare. We must memorize lots of those long words he uses. And in the exams, we must vomit up what our teacher has told us about Shakespeare without ever thinking of what it means. Now, very quickly, there's this guy called Stephen Krashen, yeah? And what he said is we don't learn languages by memorizing the grammar, yeah? What we do is we learn languages by speaking them, by listening to them, yeah? We learn languages by communicating in them. And Krashen's still alive. He's, Christ, he must be 88, 89 years old. He's American. And what Krashen said was, the teacher's job is to find out what the students know, let's call it here and to go into the class and give them new stuff that they can understand. He called it comprehensible input, that they can actually understand, that their level of English is such that they can understand what the teacher is talking about. And he said, if we don't do that, students will never learn. Mesela eski eşim birkaç hafta önce öldü. İstanbul'da ismi Ayşe Gündü. Ve I'm speaking Turkish. I'm telling you about my wife died recently, okay? And I'm speaking to you in Turkish. Now, if I speak to you in Turkish every single day, if we come on Zoom every single day for 15 minutes, and I speak to you in Turkish like that, will you learn Turkish? You go onto YouTube and you watch Cantonese, or okay, Professor Brown is with us. If you watch the news in Japanese, will you learn Japanese? And the answer is no, because it's much, much, much too difficult. That what I've got to do as a teacher, I've got to give you stuff in bite-sized pieces. I've got to build, haven't I, on what you know already. And if you don't know any Turkish, if you don't know any Japanese, then you will not learn Japanese by watching the news. Yeah? Got it? So what Krashen said was, we as teachers, we should be teaching I, that's what you know already, +1. Next step up, yeah? Comprehensible input, I +1. And he said, if we teach I +19, 19 steps up, no one's going to learn anything, right? But then he made an exception, Krashen. And he said, except with reading. He said, there we should teach I -1. We should be giving students reading passages marginally below their own level. Okay? Understand? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Super, super, super. And the next thing we should do, you people, most of you are in Dhaka, right? Yeah? Yeah? Do you ever go to Nilket? You know, the second-hand book shops? Or, for example, you go there, can't you, and you can buy photocopied books, pirated books, yeah? Yeah? Do you ever go there? Because
yes, we do.
Yeah, it's cheap, isn't it? And then you've got the book, right? And somebody else has had this book before. And on the page 1, page 2, page 3, they've written stuff in the margin, yeah, in pencil. They've said mellifluous means this, cacophony means this. And they've gone to a dictionary, they've looked it up on Google, and they've written the word, either an English definition or they've written it in Bangla. Yes? See, you've seen that, yeah? All those little notes in the book, yeah? You've seen them. The trouble is, if you go to page 190, there are no notes. All those notes stop after about 5 pages or 10 pages. And that's because the person who's reading the book is so bored and the book is so difficult that they've given up. Yeah? Yeah? And that's because our teachers are giving us stuff to read that is much too difficult for us. Yeah? It's really, really hard. But actually, to improve our reading, we need stuff that's relatively easy. Wait there 1 second. Because when we're reading, okay, when we're reading, we are not reading every single word. Yeah? We can read 5 times as fast as we can speak. 5 times. Yeah? And the way that we do that is we don't read every word. We know what the next word is going to be and we don't have to read it. For example, Tanzia is very good. What's the next word? Yeah. And BEC. It's the beginning of a word. What will that word be? You know, don't you? That word is going to be because, become, or became. Now, it might be beckon. Yeah? But that's very unlikely. 99.9%, it's going to be because, become, became. You know that. Yeah? And when we're reading, we're not reading every word on the page. Yeah? Most of the words on that page we know, okay? And I'm going to prove it to you. Are you all ready? Ready? I'm going to show you something, okay? And I'm going to put it up in front of my screen for 2 seconds. It's just a few words, okay? Are you all looking at the screen? Are you ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What did it say?
You didn't see your screen, man.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Paris in the spring. Yes, sir.
Paris in the spring, yeah?
Spring.
Paris in the spring.
The screen.
Paris in the spring. But the problem is, it doesn't say that, does it? It actually says,
Paris in the Spain.
Paris in the
no, you see, it doesn't say that. It doesn't. It says in the spring. Right. There are two thus there, aren't there?
Yes, sir. There are 2 there.
Yeah. First time you didn't see it, did you? Because your brain said to you, obviously, he hasn't written the, because everyone knows that's wrong. Yes?
yes.
It's not wrong, is it? It's Paris. Yeah. You see, but what you actually read, what your brain saw was Paris in the spring, because you know that is a grammatically correct collection of words. Agreed? Yeah, now here is my point. What we need to do as students, yeah, think about exams for God's sake. What you need to do as students is you need to read very fast, don't you? And the trouble is, if you're reading stuff that is just much too difficult for you, number one, it's boring because you don't know the words and you've got to keep looking at the dictionary again and again and again. Number two, yeah, you lose track. You're so focused on the difficult grammar, the difficult words, right, that you lose the meaning of the story. You lose the meaning of the page because you're concentrating on the meaning, cacophony, or malevolent, yeah, words which, let's face it, are unimportant to us. And therefore, what I would suggest you do is you follow Stephen Krashen's advice and you read at I-1 a bit easier than your language ability. Yeah? And there's something you can do. Look at those. You know what those are? Those are old fingers. Yeah? And what you should do is, when you get a book, open the book, and every time, yeah, on one page, any page, yeah, every time you don't know a word, put one finger down. And what will happen is that if you've still got, yeah, if you only needed 5 fingers, you're okay. That book, which has probably got 5 words you don't know on every page, no problem. You can understand that story. But if it's got more than 5 words you don't know, that story is probably too difficult for you. And you should read something easier. Because when you read stuff you know, yeah, you get automatic recognition. Just like Paris in the spring. You know all those words. Yeah, yeah, you get automatic, and this increases how fast you can read. And when you can read quickly, you can read more enjoyably. Yeah? I'm coming to my next point. Don't worry, I've got about 10 minutes left, okay? I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes more. And I'm going to tell you this. Yeah. Teachers, you see, the best way to learn new words is reading. It's not, definitely not learning great long lists before exams, because you know what happens, don't you? Yeah, you learn these great big long lists, and they're all there for the exam, but 48 hours after the exam's finished, half of them have gone. And 1 week after the exam is finished, 80% of them have gone. Yeah? In other words, we are learning a language just for an exam grade, but we forget most of the words we've learned. First thing. The second thing is this. With grammar, we as teachers are teaching students grammar because it's got a name, like the future perfect continuous. I will have been eating, yeah? Or we could say the future perfect passive. It will have been eaten. Yeah, and we teach this. And you can find it in textbooks. You remember, don't you, from HSC doing this, yeah? The question is, why do you need to know the future perfect continuous? It is a useless tense. Yeah? Yeah, we use it, I don't know, once a week, once a month, native speakers. It is not actually that useful, but we teach it because it's got a name, future perfect continuous. But what we don't do is we don't teach about to. Ready? I can't talk now. I'm about to go out. We use that all the time. All the time we use be about to plus the infinitive verb 1. But it's not in any textbooks, is it? No one ever teaches us. There is no lesson about that grammatical structure. Why not? It doesn't have a name. And this is what I want to tell you. Language, Bangla, English, Japanese, is so complicated. Yeah, that there is so much to learn that the only way you can really learn is by reading. A teacher, if you're waiting for teachers to teach you the whole English language, you're going to finish Green University, yeah, when you are the same age as Professor Dr. Abdur Razzaque, yeah, never ending. How do we improve? We improve by reading. I'm just going to give you one example. Sick and ill mean the same thing, don't they? Sick and ill. Yeah? I can't talk tonight, I'm sick. I can't talk tonight, I'm ill. Yeah? They mean the same thing, don't they? Agreed? But they're not the same. Because sick, we can put in front of a noun. For example, yeah, she has devoted her life to sick children. But we can't say ill children, yeah, are in this hospital. We can't put ill before a noun. But if you ask, sick and ill, they're the same thing, obviously. And language, any language, English, Bangla, Japanese. I know nothing about Japanese, but they are so complicated in terms of their grammar, in terms of their vocabulary, that the only way we can really be comfortable is not from listening to a teacher teach it, because the teacher doesn't have time and you would be bored to death. The only way we can actually become comfortable with this is by reading. I am now going to, for 2 minutes, tell you some things. People who read books outside of the syllabus, outside of what they're studying, do better at school and at university. People who read, storybooks, are better at maths and physics when they're at school. Kids who read get higher exam results in chemistry, than people who don't read. People who read are more confident about their language skills, and therefore they're not so worried about practice, they're not so shy. People who read do better in life. Right. And final thing, reading opens up whole new worlds to you. Yeah. It may be pirates, it may be computer fraud, it may be love stories. Yeah. It may be about detectives or gangsters or the mafia. It may be about Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. It may be Tajuddin Ahmed. It may be anything you want. And those books are available not only outside, but they're also available in Bangladesh, written by Bangladeshis, talking about your lives, your history, your future. Reading is an unmitigated good. Thank you very much for listening to me. I have been speaking for 48 minutes, and this is only an hour long. You've got 10 minutes, I believe, for questions.
Yes.
Thanks for your attention. I'll be honest, Zoom is difficult for me because I'm talking all this time. I don't know if you can understand me. I don't know how good your English is. It's very difficult to get feedback when there are 173 people watching you. Yeah, I hope you could understand. And I am now going to the chat box. Yeah, I'm now going to the chat box. Are you ready? This is my email. If you would like the PowerPoint presentation, if you send it to me, I would be delighted to send it to you. Here we go. Ghiyasuddin Rakib has said to me, "Sir, what do you know about Bangladesh?" I've been here for, I think, 11 years. I know quite a lot, yeah, but my Bangla is terrible. Do you want to hear me speak some Bangla? Who wants to hear me speak some Bangla? Just shout out yes, if you want to.
That would be nice.
Ready? Ready? Inshallah, mashallah, alhamdulillah. Please, don't say that's not Bangla. That was a joke. I know it's not Bangla. Are you ready? Come on, Asim. Shuja, Shuja, Dayadike, Fanujan. That's about all the Bangla I know. Chingri. Any questions about my shower has just gone, wow. If you're impressed by that shower, really, you would be impressed with anything. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such
My
a
pleasure.
lively and informative speech. I mean, it gave us new perspective on the mistakes that we make and some prejudices we have when it comes to improving and teaching reading skills, I guess. So thank you so much. I have also received a few questions from my chat box. Students, if you have something to ask Mark, please leave a message on the chat box to me and I will read it out because there are time constraints and there might be connectivity issues. We will have a very brief question answer session. So I request everyone to leave questions. I have already received a few questions, so I'm going to read it out. The first question I have received is from Arifa Akhtar Umi. She's asking that skimming and scanning is the most important part of reading skills. How can I develop myself in these skills, particularly in skimming? And she also has another question attached to it. Sometimes we read some texts or content which is totally different from our context, culture, and traditions. So reading seems very difficult for us students. Can you suggest me anything that will help me overcome this issue? So this is the
Yes.
question, Juman.
Okay. I like the second question, but I don't like the first question. The first question, why would we skim and scan? We would do that to read very, very quickly, usually because we are in an exam. And I must be honest with you and say that my interest in reading has nothing to do with exams. And therefore, shortcuts like skimming and scanning are not where my research interest lies. Secondly, and very interestingly, there
Mark, can you hear us?
yes, I can. Just once.
Oh, sure. Just a couple of seconds. I think we're having some issues with the audio.
Hi, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. I was actually typing a poem, but I don't think I probably got time. So, in answer to the question, it's kind of like what I'm saying about Charles Dickens. I'm interested in history, and therefore, when I'm reading Oliver Twist about life in London for the poor in 1840, 1850, I've got a fairly good idea. Charles Dickens is talking about, I think actually 1836, but still. But the problem for you, of course, is that you don't know that history, and that makes life, that makes understanding the text much more difficult for you. And therefore, I would like to say that some of the stuff that Professor Brown has been putting up, Professor Brown, could I ask you to go into the chat box and to put a link to your website with Bangladeshis writing about life in Bangladesh. Yeah. But yes, but the girl who asked the question, I can still read about Anna Karenina, one of Tolstoy's women characters. And even though she was she was fictional character, but even though she was living 150 years ago in Russia, before, when they still had a king in Russia, and even though she had, I can still understand that woman without understanding each and every cultural reference. Yeah? So don't give up. Just carry on reading. Next question, please.
Next question is from Niamul. Niamul is from Sabri, and he says that while reading, we find a lot of vocabularies we aren't familiar with, and during reading one book, it's quite boring to Google or go for the dictionary for understanding the words.
Yeah.
So what is your suggestion in this case?
If you have to read that book because it's on your syllabus, I would suggest the following. Number one, everybody, Cherry has Professor Brown has just posted stories about ourselves, reading materials with a Bangladeshi focus written by Bangladeshi writers. And if you go onto that link, you will see that it says pre-intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced, blah, blah, blah. So you can choose the language level you want. Let me recommend it. If you go onto YouTube, you will find that many of the great novels, which are taught on university courses, they have cartoon versions, they have films, they have, and if the vocabulary really is so difficult, watch the film, watch the cartoon, take all the help you can get. If you're reading the book for pleasure, then stop, because the book is too difficult for you. Choose an easier one. Next question, please.
Next came from Muntasir. I think many of the questions are similar, but I'm reading this out. He says that, sir, I can read English nicely, I understand, but whenever I'm attending a Viva or examination board, the speaking goes terrible. I can't complete the sentences within a breath. I need to give pause to speak a normal word. How can I overcome this situation? More related to speaking, I guess.
Tanzia, I'm awfully sorry, I've forgotten was it Muntasir?
Yes, Muntasir.
Muntasir, email me, because I have a free weekly discussion group on Zoom, where you can talk and practice. and no one can see your face. No one, most of them are in Chittagong, I think. You can be anonymous and still get the chance to practice. But what you're talking about is not an English problem. You're talking about a confidence problem. Yeah? And the answer to confidence is practice, practice, practice, practice. Who's next, please?
I think this could be our last question. It is from Tajriya Brishti. She says that my question is about Ielts reading. I have set for Ielts exam after completing my HSC, but my score was very low. It was only 5.5. In the Ielts session, my teacher suggested me to read English newspaper. So how really important is it to read newspaper to improve reading skills and English in general?
My dear, again, I'm sorry, I've forgotten.
Tajriya Brishti.
Tajriya, Rishti,
Brishti, yes.
Brishti, email me and I will send you readings. I think the most important thing about IELTS, that horrible exam, is, here is my question though, why do you need it? It's furiously expensive, yeah? And unless you're going to go abroad to study, or unless you want to emigrate, why do you need it? Yeah? So there's my first question, because studying for IELTS, I mean, it's like going to the dentist, isn't it? It's horrible. It is my first point. But my second point is, if you really do need it, read a variety. Read about science, read about history, read fiction, read from the newspapers. But be careful if you're reading the Daily Star, the Independent, and so on, because very often the English in those newspapers isn't actually that good, okay? It's got lots of mistakes.
Okay, with that note, I think we have to close the question answer session. Thank you so much, our lovely students, for sharing your thoughtful questions with our speaker. But as you can see, we have time constraints. So yes, we will be doing that from now on. We will talk about English, how we can improve our skills. And thank you so much, Mark, for giving us the time today to speak to our students, to giving them advice, and for giving us advice as well as teachers.
It really was my pleasure. Thank you, all of you. I hope I was not talking too fast. Excuse me. When I say email me, I am serious. Please do email me if I can be of any help to you whatsoever. I'm in lockdown like the rest of you, yeah? When I get emails with questions about English or about reading, it brightens up my day. Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you.
We're nearing the end of our webinar. Let me just say that I'm also pleased to know that our next webinar will be with Professor Cherry Brown, Akita International University, Japan. And we are also very glad that she made the time to join us in this webinar as well. So now I would like to request Professor Cherry Brown to say a few words on this occasion. And please.
Thank you so much, Tanzia, for inviting me, and to the distinguished guests, I would also like to offer my appreciation for the chance to be here. Mark, thank you for what you have said about reading. I found myself nodding all the way through and agreeing with so many of the points that you have made. And yes, our time is short, so I don't want to sort of comment on too many things. But just by way of background, I'm a teacher of reading at my Japanese university, which is an English medium university, and I'm teaching students in their first and second year. And the area that I'm responsible for is academic reading across the disciplines. So for my upper level students, that is the focus, academic reading. For my lower level students, my focus is very much on a balance between academic reading skills at a very simple level and what we call extensive reading, which is, as Mark described it in simple terms, reading for pleasure. And that is so important. And I would stress that it's very important because in order to understand and to gather meaning from a word that we don't know in the middle of a reading text, we actually have to understand around 97% of that reading text before we can make sense of a word that we don't know. And this is why it's very, very important to read books that are not too hard, that you can read easily, that you can read fairly quickly, and that you can enjoy. It is extremely important. So I would like to underscore your point there. The other thing I'd like to stress is vocabulary is the key to language learning. Without words, we can't communicate anything. We can know a lot of grammar, but if we haven't got the words to put into the structures that we learn, we still can't communicate. And I totally agree with you, Mark. Many times teachers are teaching students the wrong words, and students are trying to learn words that they will very rarely use. And so my focus with my students is to introduce them to what we call high frequency vocabulary. And that just means the most common words in English. And there are lists of these words where you can go, you can check which ones do you know, which ones do you not know. And there are also very important lists of academic words, high frequency or very common academic words. And I would stress that students should focus on learning the most common words in English first. Don't waste your time learning words that are not important. And when you are reading, if you have access to these lists, if you can get your hands on them and see them, you can check whether a word is important to know or not to know. But the important thing beyond learning words is to put those words to use for you. So it's very important when you are learning new words, whether that's through reading or speaking, however, that you use those words and try and put them into your own original sentences. So reading widely helps you to see how common words are used. I recommend to my students that they use graded readers when they are learning English. And I send my students to a wonderful website called Ielts Reading, which has many, many, many, many graded reading books. The problem is, I think, for many Bangladeshi learners, is when you are reading in English, as Mark said, you're often reading about things that are very unfamiliar. The context, the situation, the ideas, the cultural background often is very different from what you know. And so that is one reason why we have created the Stories About Ourselves website, to try and give learners in Bangladesh reading materials, stories, poems, which are written by Bangladeshi people, so that when you read that story or that poem, you're not trying to work out two things at the same time. You're not trying to understand the ideas and the culture and the context and the situation, which is difficult or different from your own experience, at the same time as trying to understand the language. So by providing stories about things that you know about, that will help you to focus more on the language that you need to learn. And it will be interesting because it will be familiar. So yes, I totally agree that reading for pleasure is really important. And for teachers who are listening today, I'd also like to encourage you to be a good role model to your students in terms of your own reading habits. It's very difficult to motivate your students if you don't practice
Yes.
reading habits yourself. And so with that in mind, talk to your students about the things that you are enjoying reading in English. Share and have your students share back and make it very much a two-way conversation. And I think then students become more motivated and more eager to take part. So those are a few comments I would like to make, and I will be talking a little more about stories about ourselves in another situation, in another seminar. So I hope that if you're interested, you will go to the website. You can get there two ways. You can go through the Bangladesh English Language Teachers Association homepage. There's a link, or you can go to the link that I gave you in the chat bar. So thank you for the opportunity to take part and to comment as well.
Thank you, Sherry Brown, for your wonderful words. And yes, it has been a really lively and exciting session for us teachers and students as well, because I got so many questions today for the session. And next webinar, yes, we will have it with Sherry Brown and Mark again. So with that note, now I would like to invite and humbly request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir, Professor Dr. Muhammad Abdur to please deliver his concluding speech for our webinar today. Thank you so much for staying with us.
Thank you very much, Tanzia, for your nice introduction. I was listening with deep interest the suggestions, recommendations, the presentation made by Dr. Ma, and the comments put by Professor Cherry Brown. It was really highly informative, educative to me, and was very interesting as well the way in which he presented the material. I recall one famous quote during the presentation of Dr. Ma that I came across at my childhood. The more you read, the more things you know. The more that you learn, the more places you will go. So that's really fully accurate. And today's presenter has rightly identified the different tips and tricks to be a skilled reader. And we all know that the word read basically means to understand the meaning of written or printed words or a symbol. And reading is very much fundamental that helps us to find and convey information. And definitely, reading is a prerequisite to be a good writer. Reading is a very important part of our communication skill as well. And it definitely helps us to discover new things. It helps us to develop our mind. It also helps us to increase our creativity. And it has numerous such benefits. And definitely, a skilled reader can predict rightly what will happen next in a story. A skilled reader can develop questions about the main idea of a particular message or a text. And it has many advantages. So the importance of reading, the ways and means of increasing our reading skills, and some specific recommendations relating to Bangladesh context have been discussed in today's seminar, and I believe our students will remember for long the lessons they have learned in today's discussion session. And I really appreciate the Language Center, its coordinator Tanzia, director Shirajul Munira, and their mentor, our guardian, Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University of Bangladesh, Professor Dr. Golam Samdani Fakir, for facilitating such a very important seminar today. And I also appreciate the huge gathering in this virtual classroom. I notice it's around 200. So I really appreciate the efforts made by our students. And I believe it's not the end, it's the starting. And the Language Center will continue arranging such scholarly sessions in future days to enrich our students with various skill development processes. So thank you very much for inviting me to be here. And thank you again, Dr. Mark and Professor Cherry Brown, to be part of this today's session and to contribute for our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful speech and for inspiring us. And this is the end of our webinar then. Thank you so much, everyone, students and our respected guests for joining. And particularly, we are very grateful to Dr. Mark Bartholomew and Professor Cherry Brown, our Vice Chancellor, sir, our Pro Vice Chancellor.